Welcome back, everybody, to Discussing a Murderer. I'm your host, Jeff Jones, and with me today I have the panel. Kelly, hello.
Good morning, everyone. As always, thank you for having me.
Big Jeff.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for the invite. It's good to be back to discuss this. And thanks for the invite. And even though it might be morning in Australia, it is getting on evening here in Massachusetts. So good evening.
Good evening. It's 12:45 p.m. in Hawaii. Just FYI for everybody to know, I'm right in the middle of the day here. And finally, with us, Dr. Silkman.
Good morning, everyone. I'm calling from sunny South Australia, and it's 9:15 in the morning. Good to be here.
To get right back into it, at the end of episode 2, we were kind of discussing the fact that Manitowoc had knowledge that there was a good chance that the rape that Stephen Avery was accused of was actually perpetrated by a man named Gregory Allen. Episode 3 is going to start here with Allen Avery, and we'll go from there. I hope everybody enjoys and follows along. We're at about the 30-minute mark for this episode.
To me, it's just heartbreaking to see, Allen Avery there, sort of a little bit past his youthful prime, but still in a place where he's mobile, right? He's got all his faculties about him. He's not frail, and just to compare that to what he is now, and to know that he's had to live with his son in prison throughout the time he is now, to the sort of the devastated age. It is just it's incomprehensible. If you have children of your own, just to have that time stolen is incomprehensible, and it just shows you from here to there. It's just heartbreaking.
Tom Kacurik told Stevie, I don't care if you did this or if you didn't do it. I'm going to get you for it. Now, is that anything to say to anybody? And what did he do? That goddamn Dennis Vogel and that son of a bitch in Hazel, the judge. Steve had 22 witnesses at least. And there was one of them right there. And every one of us were called fabricators, liars.
If the alibi witnesses were believed, there would be no way to find him guilty. Steve Avery was accounted for every minute from about 1:30 that afternoon until at least 5 o'clock. The victim was sexually assaulted at approximately 3:50. All of these alibi witnesses testified that on the day of the assault, Steve Avery was helping his parents and other family members pour concrete at the salvage yard. The cement truck arrived sometime between 1 and 2 o'clock. Witnesses testified either that they were out working with him pouring the concrete, or they were in the house watching Divorce Court from 3 o'clock to 3:30 and saw Steve Avery immediately afterwards. Steve Avery then took his sister in his 4x4 car out to a local gravel pit. They got stuck out there. They had to dig it out. They got back right around 4 o'clock. At that point, Steve Avery picked up his wife and his children. He had 2 very young babies that had just been born a few days earlier. And then it went to Green Bay. It was about a 35-minute drive to Green Bay. They washed the car. They got something to eat. They went to the Shopko store. Evidence was presented of a receipt giving the time at 5:13. And when he came back from Green Bay with his wife, he called his brother Earl to have him come over and help do some drywall in his house. And that they did that in the evening, finally going to bed, which is about the time that the police then arrived.
When I kicked him, he said, "Now you're going to die. Now I'm going to kill you."
And what did he do then?
Then he put his hands on my neck and he started choking me very hard.
Penny Bernstein was everything that Stephen wasn't. Smart, educated, well-to-do, church-going lady, a business owner, involved in community affairs. So just think of the two of them side by side.
Ms. Bernstein, she's a very good witness. She was very positive. She stated that she'd made a point when the crime was being committed of remembering who it was who was doing this to her. And that carried the day.
Can I just make the comment? It's rather remarkable now that Judge Hazelwood is using the eyewitness identification of Penny Bernstein to basically clear his conscience, right? It's remarkable that they're now all backpedaling, all backtracking, and who are they pointing the finger of blame ultimately at? The victim herself, which is absolutely shameful. But the other important point I want to make is notice the contrast between the victim and the suspect in terms of their social standing, their background, their education, their relationship with law enforcement. There's a huge divide between Penny Bernstein and Stephen Avery. And of course, who are the people going to believe? Penny or Stephen Avery? Thank you.
Well, we know the answer to that, don't we? And I think as we went into last week quite extensively, minimally, Penny needed to be pressured. When she was at that meeting with Bergner, from the Manitowoc Police, in the meeting with Kasurek, saying, I don't think he might not be the right guy. I've been getting these phone calls. Something happened, right? And that something, I can't think of another word for it besides pressure.
Yeah, 100%.
To either get her back from 0% to 95% where she was, or 100%. It's just so there's not a single even her, right? Even her, and you are so right about what did Alan Avery say? That son of a bitch in Hazelwood.
Yeah, correct.
Who allowed some very odd in the trial, some very odd demonstrations that were put on. They brought up the husbands and did some sort of
reenactment.
Reenactment. Yeah. Thank you.
Reenactment. Yeah. And in actual fact, Vogel made Penny and her husband reenact it, I think twice. So you can imagine the horrific scenes in the courtroom where people are watching this and knowing that the potential attacker, the accused, is sitting within feet of them, right? And, it goes to show that despite the fact that Stephen had 16 alibi witnesses, and we all saw how ludicrous the state's position was, right? Stephen was nowhere near the beach. And yet to think that a judge and a jury convicted the man, guys, that's scary. That's very scary.
It really is. I just keep going back to the point of this failed logic that they continued. They say they didn't make a mistake because it was the witness's identification, and then here he says, her story her story won the day. Won the day?
Yeah, it was a victory, right?
Justice wasn't served. Yeah, exactly. I think that you say exactly how he meant it to say it again.
I was just wanted to throw in a little bit of like a statistic, because we're talking about eyewitnesses here. I just want to clean all that up. When I was doing my puzzle diaries and I was going through all the statistics and I was getting all my information, I just want to say, when we talk about witnesses, because you watch that timeline of Stephen Avery and how he was accounted for, and there were 16 witnesses, and I'm the first one, and everyone's going to probably roll their eyes because they've heard me say this 1,000 times, but I'm not big on eyewitnesses. I don't think they're as a sole witness, you have to be really careful because there's so many factors that can, alter their accounts. But I just wanted to say, in the statistics and the study that they've shown, the most accountable witnesses is when there's 6+. If you've got more than 6 witnesses stating like the same baseline of an account or a person or something, that is actually, they kind of don't roll into they become a proper eyewitness, what I'm trying to say. But I just wanted to just remind everyone that for cases of wrongful convictions, the very first is a mistaken witness by ID. Witnesses' error is the single greatest cause of wrongful convictions nationwide. It plays a role of 72% of convictions are overturned through DNA testing because the original basis was a wrongful eyewitness account. And then after that is false confessions. After that is false forensic evidence. After that is perjury, and the last one is usually official misconduct. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well, because I just thought, let's clean up the whole eyewitness thing, because as we go along, I think we've got to take that into consideration, because that is going to become a part of Teresa's story as well. When we get to Teresa's eyewitness account becomes part of this story. And I want to set the ground for that now, because it had a big impact on 1985 and it has a big impact in 2005.
Yeah, and the other important issue here, and it really stands out, and I 100% agree with what you said, Kelly. We mustn't forget, it's the caliber of the witness that was important here, right? Not the mere factor of eyewitness identification per se, because how disgusting that Peg Lockenschlatter said in her report, eyewitness identification is not a very good form of identification, exactly mirroring what Kelly just said. And yet, if you look at this case, it was all about eyewitness identification, right? Because there was nothing else to tie Stephen to the attack on Penny.
An interesting contrast to make there, Dr. Silkman, is that probably in this time, 1985, you probably would think that it's actually this eyewitness thing is actually counterintuitive. And in the 1985 timeframe, you might think that an eyewitness is about the best thing that you can have. And that's what they went out and got. And even if they had the pressure into doing it, that's what they got. And in 2005, it seems to me that the best thing to have would be the infallible DNA evidence.
Correct.
And that's what they got.
It's completely flipped. But just as a side note, what is important is that the 16 eyewitnesses for Stephen were not good enough compared to the one eyewitness in Penny Bernstein, right?
And they were right, and she was wrong. That's the other big one.
Yeah. And it wasn't all family either. That's the thing. It was. As Kelly said, 6 was enough. And I think that Allen had invoked the number of 23. I think that 16 takes away the family, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Correct.
So like the cement truck driver, people who have nothing to do with the Averys, well exceeding Kelly's 6. But who won the day?
And they also, that's correct. And they also had a shopping receipt as well as a timestamp, so that they knew that Stephen was nowhere near the beach. So despite that bulletproof eyewitness alibis, right, for Stephen, it was trumped by one person, and that was Penny herself. And again, it goes to show that the underlying force here was to nail Stephen at all costs. So all logic went out the window.
Yeah, I don't recall. I agree 100%. Do you recall whether or not they're going to get into the fact that they did a reproduction of the drive that Stephen did?
Yes.
And in order for him to have, they're going to get into that.
I think so. The ridiculous nature of that was that in order to get to the beach, They had to drive 10 to 15 miles over the speed limit and not take into account the fact that he had to get his children and his wife and then drive to other locations. So it was a botched reproduction.
And he would have had to park at the beach with his
Correct.
wife and kids in the car, go perform the rape, and then come back and get the kids and drive back. And I'm not really sure they accounted for the amount of time it took to actually for the rape to actually occur.
And we know from last week's episode when he realized there was a child in the car in the Sandra Morris incident, he paused what he was doing and he stopped. So that doesn't even follow Stephen Avery's own MO, right?
He never potentially exposed his children to something like that. No.
That's correct. And the other thing you got to take into account was that Penny had seen her attacker on the way when she was running. And then when she came back, then she encountered her attacker. So that meant that if Stephen had done this, he would have had to have been at the beach earlier, right? Which completely throws out the timelines. And they knew it. The investigators knew that the timeline did not fit Stephen.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff. So I guess this is my number one. This is why I'm here. This is why I investigated 1985 so hard, because like it or not, in this community, eventually you have to deal with a class of people called guilters. And one of their points, and it's actually a very strong point, is that conspiracies the likes of which you're talking about don't happen. Right. I grew up not all that far from Boston, and in Boston they have an expression is that the only way 3 people can keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead. They trace that back to the Winter Hill Gang. If you guys from Boston look up Whitey Bulger, but if you look at what's going on here, the vastness of this conspiracy is unbelievable. That starts, with Sandra Morris getting run off the road, but then, somehow, this rape happens at a very convenient time that they're able to, and look at the people they roll in: Kosurik, Vogel, the eyewitness herself pressured into it. This is a massive conspiracy.
Correct.
And people just played along with it. So you don't think conspiracies can happen? Here's one right here, right? 1985, correct. And it's the same guy. And that, to me, this is the most important thing, is that, yes, they can, and people play right along all the way up to that son of a bitch in Hazelwood.
That's 100% correct. And that's why studying the 1985 case is so important and so critical, because it shows in black and white on paper, and not only a conspiracy, but collusion and corruption on a huge scale. In other words, all the red flags that should have gone up were ignored. And the only reason why they were ignored is because they were deliberately targeting Stephen. There can be no other explanation for it. In other words, all oversights and checks were ignored deliberately.
I don't know if you guys watched this guy who it's one of these YouTubers who's a real ex-cop, cold case cop. I'm not sure I want to plug his channel because of his attitude on this case. But his channel is called Unsolved No More. Name is Weeks. And I actually respect the guy quite a bit. And having watched Avery, I watched some of his other videos. I thought they were very good. And he came to the conclusion in his video that the 1985 case was just an accident. And I think if he would sit down, take the time to watch this video and look at what set up the 1985 case, that would change his attitude. And very interestingly, he broke his MO on this case. And when him is the YouTuber. And typically he does, a small snippet on Tuesday, the deep dive on Wednesday, and then a live on Friday where you can go. He skipped his live. He got so many comments on his channel. He didn't do his live. So I wonder, I would love to have him on and sort of talk to him about 1985 and what's the real stuff going on, because like Investigator T, Kelly. He has his doubts when real police officers are exposed to things. They point to things that us amateurs, sleuths, don't think about. And those those interactions with Investigator T were very eye-opening. The things that he keyed in on are much different than the things that us amateurs kind of say, oh, that's a big thing. He said, no, that's not the big thing. This is the big thing. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that YouTuber you're talking about, I wrote a huge response. It got deleted. I wonder why.
Well, we're polite enough.
I mean, I think that's why what we're doing here on this podcast is the blueprint for people like him. Like, come watch this, and we'll explain it. We're gonna break it down. We're gonna beat that drum, as they say. But I think,
Jeff,
go ahead.
If I make the comment, the thing that really pisses me off is these fly-by-nighters who spend 3 days looking at a case and
Sure.
They believe they solved the case. And yet everyone on this panel has spent years, and I mean years, digging, diving, discussing, producing products, doing documentaries, looking at all the primary information. And boy, we can see exactly what happened to Stephen in 1985. And look what happened to him in 2005. Now, we didn't spend 3 minutes on this case. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours together discussing as a group in a professional way. And we've all come to the same conclusion. And that is that Stephen was set up in 1985 and very much was likely set up in 2005 because, as Big Jeff would allude to, it's the same guys that were in 1985 were involved in 2005. The beef, the feud continued. It didn't stop.
To her. And that carried the day.
Were you able to pick out anyone in that live lineup?
Yes, I was.
And do you have an opinion as to whether or not the person you picked out in the live lineup is the same as the person you picked out today?
Yes, it is the same person.
Are you positive of that?
I am absolutely positive.
The whole thing was a nightmare. How do you think a man feels? You see your son sitting right there. And he's saying the tears are coming out of his eyes. Didn't do it, he said. I'm innocent. I didn't do it. And he didn't do it. You were with him, It's hard to take.
In Wisconsin, the way the parole system was set up is if you didn't admit your guilt, you did not get paroled. And of course, Stephen didn't admit his guilt because he wasn't guilty. So that meant he wasn't going to get paroled. He watched people who actually had murdered somebody walk out. And he sat there.
If I did it, I'll admit right away. I'll take the punishment. I'll do the time. But I don't brag for something I didn't do. I'll stay strong. I'll never fail.
I just wanted to, while we're on that spot, I just want to highlight what she just said. If you don't admit your guilt, you can't get parole. I just want to echo that because Brendan Dassey can get parole in 2048, but it comes with that catch. He has to admit his guilt and basically do what O'Kelly tried to get him to do. Say you're sorry. Would you do it again? It's reliving that torment of how many times do I have to tell you I didn't do it? And I just think it absolutely blows my mind that is actually a thing to get granted on parole, that you have to admit your guilt when there is people in prison that are wrongfully convicted and they are standing by they're basically got their hands tied behind their back and saying, listen, if you don't admit it, you're never getting out. Where do you go with something like that? That's insane.
Well, that's an excellent point. And it goes to show that the judicial system, the criminal justice system, is designed for people to lie. So, in other words, they put the carrot in front of you and they say, look, you want to come out of prison? You got a 30-year sentence. You can come out in 10. You just have to admit that you did the crime. So, in other words, what they're doing is they're dangling a carrot to get you out of prison potentially early, only if you admit to the crime. So, in other words, what the investigators want is to solve the case. Put a big tick next to that case and say,
You
yep.
just want closure.
They want closure. Stephen Avery had committed this assault. No problems at all. Done. We'll let you out early. Now, Brendan Dassey is faced with the same dilemma. And, he could only be released in, I think, 2048 if he admits to the violent crimes allegedly that he did to Teresa Horbach. And he also will be a registered sex offender for life. He can't be pardoned until he admits his guilt. So, in other words, you are only given favors, per se, if you admit guilt to a crime that you haven't committed. So if you believe in your innocence and you haven't done anything, potentially means you will stay in prison for the rest of your life and probably die in prison to maintain your innocence. Now, what type of system have we got there, Jeff?
An illogical type of system.
Unfair.
Yeah, shocking.
That it's not what people want. Let's put it that way. This isn't what the people want.
Correct. And the other important point is that for every person who's jailed, who is innocent, it means that the perpetrator is out free, still committing their crimes. And we all know what Gregory Allen was doing, right? He was still terrorizing women, raping women until he finally got caught. And that is a massive stain directly to the front door of Tom Kaczmarek and Vogel.
You're aware that Gregory Allen is not serving. He's in jail for serving 62 years, but he is actually not serving any time for the rape and attack of Penny Bernstein.
He's
never been charged with that.
100% correct. Never been charged.
And you might say, that it's actually prisoners tend to consider it a break that they get to, get out of the monotony of the day, but charge them. You know what I mean?
Correct.
How would you feel? You know what I mean? If you, there's no justice. This is not justice for Penny. I don't believe that.
No, it's not. No, in actual fact, you know what the scary thing was, Big Jeff and everybody else, was that Penny Bernstein used to go to the prisons and give talks and presentations. And guess what? it appeared, I think, she was at the same prison that Gregory Allen was at. And of course, she didn't know at the time that Gregory Allen was her attacker. Now, how freaky is that?
That is just.
And the other thing, of course, guys, was that he had her phone number, because after he attacked her on the beach, he actually rang Penny at home. So he knew where she lived. So he was a stalker, a peeping Tom.
Yeah. So when Vogel, and this is the point, is that when Vogel says that, he checked with his parole officer, and he didn't have a parole officer because he hadn't even been arrested.
He lied. He had lied. Correct. He had lied.
It's kind
in other words, this is remarkable. A district attorney gives an alibi to one of the people that has committed all these violent crimes in the past. That does my head in. What do you think about that, guys?
I do. So when Deb Strauss interviews in Deb Strauss's deposition, which they don't show, I think, in this. So this is one of the things that we know. Kelly, Stephen's attorney, asked her, "Well, did you inquire about Vogel, where he might have got this notion?
Yeah.
Did you have any intellectual curiosity to find out how this mistake might have arisen, and sort of do any inquiry? Where did you hear it? Where did you think you heard it?"
And the answer was
no.
No follow up.
What?
No follow up. And she was meant to be an investigator. No follow up, guys.
Insane.
Right.
Absolutely insane. One point that sticks out to me about the attack that I sometimes forget is that Gregory Allen said, "And now I'm going to kill you." And I have always had this suspicion that someone like Gregory Allen would be escalating to murder. And I just think it's so important to get people, to keep the right people off the streets. And I think Gregory Allen is one of those.
There was also, no doubt, there was also, I think it was in the 70s, a young girl had been murdered, and one of the prime suspects was indeed Gregory Allen, because we have, like I said, we have a researcher on foul play, Sunshine Christina, who's done an incredible amount of work on Gregory Allen, and he was a linesman for an electrical company, so you can actually trace him where he was going and alleged crimes wherever so he moved a lot. He was on the go all the time. So they can actually trace incidences that occurred wherever he was. So there are allegations that he had murdered a young girl. I think it was back in the 70s. And Gregory Allen was a prime suspect.
It's just to this day, to have a violent rapist slip through your fingers while you're targeting all of your investigation towards one man who's innocent, it's just appalling. And we've said this many times, but
it's an amazing contrast, Jeff. You make a brilliant point, because when you think about Gregory Allen's literally getting tailed by the Manitowoc Police Department. And through some miracle, he's not getting tailed on that day. But he's responsible for offense after offense after offense, and no matter what they do, they can't. He keeps on going on, and the assaults continue. And read the Peg Whitewash report. They talk about some of them, and they're horrific. And yet he somehow the Keystone Cops can't manage to haul him in and set him in prison. But Stephen, even with 16 eyewitnesses, manages to go to jail for 32 years.
Unbelievable.
It just doesn't make any. That doesn't make any sense, right? There's no logic there at all.
The other thing, guys, is that Dennis Vogel knew Gregory Allen very, very well. And what's remarkable is that Dennis Vogel downgraded some of the offenses by Gregory Allen. right? Instead of being a sexual assault,
Unbelievable.
he changed them to minor misdemeanors. And it tends to suggest to me that Gregory Allen was either a confidential informant or he was a protected species. Because, guys, how on earth could he get away with so much, so blatantly and so overtly? It's remarkable and scary. Whereas Stephen, boom, they were onto him. They arrested him on the same night that the attack took place, and he got hauled in prison on that night. So these unbelievable investigators were able to pinpoint Stephen Avery within about 6 hours, and yet Gregory Allen, with all the crimes that he did and the mere fact that he assaulted somebody on that same beach, no one knew a damn thing. That's remarkable.
I'll stay strong. I'll never fail.
Dolores would take the kids to see Stevie sometimes 2-3 times a week. The Green Bay and that, to see Steve.
A lot of times I was by myself. I'd still go just to go see him. It was Fox Lake, Green Bay, Tennessee, and Stanley. I used to go to all of them, even if it was icy. I drove on clear ice. With Lori, I suppose it was hard for her to watch the kids. That was a bunch of kids to watch, and she was alone. I don't know if she thought he would ever get out or not.
And with me and my wife, it was tough. Just fighting. And she told me she can't take it no more. And then she started she was going to kill the kids and commit suicide and everything else. A lot of back and forth, a lot of hate, and I wrote some bad letters. It lasted about 3 years. And then I told her to go for the divorce. And we just got where we didn't care about each other or nothing.
He loved Lori, and he loved the kids, but he ended up with nothing.
When she took the kids away from me, then I tried to stay busy. I kept my mind occupied. Like when I was a green but I did battle body for 9 years. All day I got my mind working on cars and paint and everything else. But then when that's all done, come back and take a shower, then you sit in the room and listen to the bars.
His mother and dad stuck by him the most. Mainly his mother. Mainly his mother. She stuck by him all those years he was in prison. So did my brother. All money they had, it went towards getting him out of prison, saying he was innocent.
Stephen and his parents came to us, I think, at the stage that, they decided this was kind of their one last gasp. The problem was that virtually all the issues that would arise from the conviction itself had already been litigated and had already been decided adversely to Stephen. It essentially came down to a requirement that we come up with some newly discovered evidence.
Rob Hennick had to.
Can I just make a comment?
Manitowoc.
What's chilling here is that's exactly what's happened to him now. in 2005 with Kathleen Zellner, and see what Glynn actually said. He goes, well, all the things that have come up, which are obvious that we can argue against, the court rejected, which means that they can't bring it up, which means that the only thing they can bring up is new evidence. Isn't that clever?
Yeah, the term that they use is procedurally barred.
That's it.
Right,
And it happened to him again. Perfect. Unbelievable.
Came down to a requirement that we come up with some newly discovered evidence. Rob Hennick had to root around in the Manitowoc courthouse, eventually having the clerks help find boxes, and then going through the boxes and finding samples of things.
We noted that the sex crimes kit had been completed and that there were the fingernail scrapings that had been collected at the time.
The science of DNA at that stage hadn't developed sufficiently, so nobody had really ever done anything with them.
We had the fingernail scrapings tested by Lab Corporation of America, and in 1995, with the testing they're able to do, they're able to limit all the population of the world into particular groups based on what are called alleles. Each of us has 2 alleles. Steve Avery and the victim have the same alleles. However, they found 3 alleles in the fingernail scrapings. 2 of them that matched Steve Avery's and the victim's, and 1 that didn't match either of them, meaning there had to be DNA from a person, not Steve Avery, under her fingernails. Our argument was that a jury could look at this evidence and decide that it was most likely the perpetrator. And when you look at all the other evidence tied together, the alibi evidence, the fact that the victim was wrong about the eye color, the fact that the victim identified the perpetrator as wearing white underwear when Steve Avery didn't even own underwear, that those kind of things would create a reasonable probability of a different result.
In this instance, the DNA evidence requires that the court speculate, regardless of which side I look at and which argument I hear.
The court accepted the state's argument that since we couldn't prove whose DNA it was, we couldn't discount the fact that this could have been her husband's DNA, one of the medical personnel's DNA, the couple that found Penny Bernson on the beach and comforted her and clothed her while they were waiting for medical assistance. And I mean, in my mind, and certainly in Rob's mind, all of that was preposterous because Penny Bernson had never said that she scraped any of those people or had any reason to claw at them. Nonetheless, the court ruled against us. The Court of Appeals ruled against us. Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled against us. And if you ever want to read an opinion, by the way, that will show you how strongly this system is designed to perpetuate a conviction, as opposed to examine whether or not somebody could in fact be innocent, read the Court of Appeals decision in Stephen Avery's case.
Can I make a couple of comments here? Yeah, I looked at all the DNA stuff. And unfortunately for Stephen at the time, the DNA investigation was fairly primitive, right? It's not as sophisticated as it is now. So back in 1996, they actually looked at 3 loci. So now you look at 20, but back then they only looked at 3. And what's remarkable here is the argument by the judge was Penny could have touched somebody else, right? Well, that's really easy to do. All they had to do was get DNA from all the potential people that had had contact with Penny and ask them 2 questions. Did Penny scratch you? Have you got a scratch mark? Do you mind doing a DNA sample and we can either rule you in or rule you out? So to test whether that allele, that extra allele that came up, they could have easily tested potential people that were near Penny. They didn't choose to do that. So the judge made a call. he could have released Stephen then and there, but he made a judgment call to say, well, we don't know who Penny potentially touched. That DNA could have come from somebody else. We're going to keep you in prison. Now, isn't that remarkable? Again, it's because had they released Stephen, it meant that it was a wrongful conviction. He wasn't the attacker, which means potentially a civil suit could have been started right back then in 1996. And you can imagine how devastating and embarrassing it would have been with Kaseric and Vogel, who were probably still working at that time, right? I believe they were still working, actively working. It would have been like a bomb going off. So the judge made a call and he kept Stephen in prison. Truly shocking when you think about it. And also, if I could just add, LabCorp made 2 mistakes on the genomic DNA profile of Stephen. I proved it. When they looked at his DNA back in 1996, they'd made 2 errors. But the TPOX, the one that showed the fact that there was an allele that was different, they got that one correct. Because in 2005, when they retested Stephen's DNA, the TPOX genotype was exactly the same. The other 2 they looked at were different, so they'd made errors. But that's understandable back in 1996. Thank you.
Well, absolutely thorough explanation. Thank you, Dr. Silkman. I try to think about the logic of the judge, and he's saying, well, this DNA could have come from this person, could have come from that person. And in this case, there's like DNA is just floating around. It's just everywhere. You brush against someone and it ends up underneath your fingernails. But in the case of Stephen Avery, if he was to use that same argument and say, well, I had contact with Teresa Halbach that day, maybe my DNA transferred onto her somehow, then in that case, it's absolutely preposterous for him to even say that. And
Correct.
You see that double standard in the law.
Correct. And for Stephen Avery, the bar is set very, very high. So in other words, even though there was a difference in the alleles, which meant that there was another donor, somebody else had left their DNA there. It wasn't Stephen, it wasn't Penny, it was another third party. The judge used the excuse, oh, well, we don't really know. And he sided on the side of the state, right? Because don't forget, Judge Hazelwood was the presiding judge in 1985. So how good is Judge Hazelwood going to look?
We talked about the conspiracy, right? So you have to ask yourself, how deep did that conspiracy run? Hazelwood, it was highly unusual that he allowed that demonstration, right, of Penny and the husband of the rape twice. You have to ask yourself, was he indeed part of the the conspiracy used to put Stephen away? Did they need him? Maybe, because with that number of witnesses, eyewitnesses piled against you, they probably needed some key rulings here and there to make sure things didn't really go his way. And when it came back, he knew why Stephen Avery had to go away.
Correct.
Potentially, and he,
correct.
So do you happen to know, Dr. Silkman, are there other cases where, that would have been, if you looked around at that time and saw that same incidents happening, were there other cases in other states or, perhaps even in Australia where that would have been enough and there would have been an exoneration?
I think in this particular case, there was... like I said, unfortunately for Stephen, the DNA technology wasn't up to par. So it was pretty primitive. They only looked at 3 particular loci. And as you can see, remarkably, both Penny and Stephen had exactly the same alleles for TPOX, right? I think it was 9 and 11. So by chance, they just happened to have the same alleles at that particular locus. So really, they needed to look at more loci. Okay, for it to be completely definitive, they needed to look at more loci. But the evidence suggested that there was another donor. So Judge Hazelwood flipped the coin and sided towards the state, right? He could have easily...
Two-headed coin.
Yeah, he could have easily let Stephen off. And I'll tell you right now, there would have been appeals against the judge, right? Kacerik, Vogel, all the people that prosecuted him the first time round would have appealed and probably demanded a new DNA test, right? Just to confirm those results. But the technology wasn't good enough to test the pubic hair. Not yet.
And if you ever want to read an opinion, by the way, that will show you how strongly this system is designed to perpetuate a conviction, as opposed to examine whether or not somebody could in fact be innocent, read the Court of Appeals decision in Stephen Avery's case. You would think that this was the guiltiest person that had ever been uncovered in a criminal case in Wisconsin. It's now 96 or 97. You have exhausted every legal proceeding that is remotely available to you. You've now been in this system for 12 years. You are a son who cares deeply about his parents, and his parents are getting older and older while he's sitting in this joint, who cares about his kids who are getting older and older. The pressure of that on a person to wrongfully confess, if you will, and to say, okay, look, I've fought the good fight. I've gone through all my appellate stuff. I'm not getting anywhere with it. It's time to level with you guys. I really did this crime. I mean, those pressures have got to be more intense than we can imagine.
No, I told me if you admit to it, we'll let you out. Otherwise, you'll be here until you're MR. You know? That's why I'll be here to my marks. I ain't gonna admit to it. I'm not gonna lie.
Here's the Court of Appeals. Sentencing papers. This one must have been in 98. I sent transcripts out, a whole bunch of them. I made 10 copies. Sit in the living room and done it on the copy machine. Then I put the pieces each on the table to make 10 of them. It was nerve-wracking. I think there's about 1,000 pages in them. Wait. This one went to New York. They went all over. Wherever 60 Minutes is, or 2020, or I can't remember the other ones all. All the things that's on TV always. I thought they'd help Stephen to get out if they read all this here script stuff. Then all of a sudden we got a lot of them back though. And they couldn't do it, they said, or something like that. Yeah, I put a lot of hours in these boxes.
I just thought we'd take the opportunity, talk a little bit about Dolores and, more of the family loss. And if anybody has any comments about Dolores and this just mountain of legal work she attempted to do, and she really fought the good fight.
Well, what I would say is, as someone who has been through most of Stephen Avery's jail calls. And you can find them on the Foul Play website. I think his mother is the one that he calls. I mean, I'm going to throw a guess percentage, 90% of the time. It's her. And he relies on her in the Teresa Hallback case, just to do everything. There's nobody, you got to do this. He's always asking her to do stuff, and to the best of her ability, she executes. And at some point, she's an old lady, right? She can only do so much. And it was a constant source of frustration for Stephen. But what she did, sitting with him, talking with him, sometimes they're just sitting and going, I don't know, just to have somebody on the other end of the line when you're sitting there rotting in a prison cell. What she did is just above and beyond. So God rest her soul.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the other important point and obvious point here is the domino effect that it has on everybody else, right? I mean, yes, Stephen is sitting in prison, but it's also devastating for the family. And we can see what happened to Stephen's own family, his wife, his kids. Everything went down a spiral of destruction. He lost his wife, he lost his children. He lost everything. And poor Dolores, right, who's no lawyer herself, worked tirelessly to get all that documentation together and send it off. And must have been very frustrating how people just simply rejected it. But it goes to show the devotion that Dolores had for her son. Truly remarkable.
Yeah, and just want to put my 2 cents in. As a mother, I don't think there would be any question in it. You just instinctively just do what you have to do. No ask would be too big. You would fight by your son's side no matter what. We see it also in like the Ryan Ferguson case, where his dad fought effortlessly for him. Like, he was just so dedicated to find the justice for his son. It's like a parental instinct. You trust them. You want to, for especially for Dolores, she knew that he was innocent. She was with him. She was a witness. So again, I think it's such a sad story to know that he wasted all this time. You can't get time back. And I think that's the saddest part for me, especially now, the fact that she's passed on and he's missed more years. It's just tragic. It really is.
Yeah, 100% accurate. And 100%. It was incredible that you mentioned the Ryan Ferguson. You know what's so frustrating here is, why do parents have to be the crime fighters? Why do parents have to be the super sleuths that need to do all this investigative work? You've got professional people, so-called investigators, who are paid to do this job, right? And if it wasn't for Ryan's dad, if it wasn't for Dolores doing all this hard work, people will still be in prison, right? So again, I make the point, why should it be up to parents and family to do the legwork that investigators should be doing? It's crazy.
I agree. These are broader questions that we bring up when we talk about this case and other cases like you mentioned. I just wanted to say about Dolores that, to have her put in hundreds of hours of work to do all, to try to do what she can for Stephen, and to just be dismissed so easily. I think that's probably what it feels like to be in one of these cases, and to trying to go against unlimited or close to unlimited resources in the justice system, and having not enough resources to even know where to begin. And it does emphasize one of the problems in our legal system.
That's correct. And they basically expected Stephen Avery from his jail cell to defend himself, right? And it goes to show the asymmetry that you have here, whereby you're correct, Jeff, where you've got the resources of the Attorney General's office, which probably has a turnover of hundreds of millions of dollars, and you've got a private citizen, Dolores, the poor thing, had to do everything by herself, use the shop's photocopier, put all the documents together, and then you've got hundreds of lawyers, hundreds of assistants, all fighting against you. How on earth are you meant to even win a case like that? You're doomed.
You learn to take patience because everything, it takes time. In prison, you gotta wait. Nothing happened just like that. They couldn't take away my love for my family, man. I never had bad hopes. No, it was always good hopes.
Both his trial lawyer and his appellate lawyer said, could you look at this guy's case, at Stephen Avery's case? We've been losing sleep over this case for 15 years. We knew the technology had advanced, so we asked for the testing again. The material was sent down to the crime laboratory again, and what they found was that there were 13 pubic hairs that had been collected during the pubic hair combings of the victim. 11 of those hairs had no root. So they were down to 2 pubic hairs. One of those hairs was from a female, probably Penny Bernson's own hair. The truth in this matter came down to that one remaining pubic hair. They got a full profile. That profile conclusively excluded Stephen Avery. It could not have come from him. Now we know that with certainty. Whether that alone would have been enough to grant him a new trial, I don't know. But even more dramatically, they took that profile from that pubic hair and they ran it through the State Crime Laboratory databank. They got a cold hit. That is to say, they matched it to somebody in the databank who they didn't know was in there. And that somebody was Gregory Allen.
When I left the prison, they ain't never left. It was gone. It stayed there behind the gates. They didn't come out with me. I was guilty when I got out. I thought I was the happiest man on earth.
How you doing? Oh, hello. How are you? Oh, pretty good. How's it feel? Oh, it was wonderful. Oh, God, so sweet. Get rid of this thing. I'm just glad they got the guy who did it. I mean, they're all her fault, you know. Honest mistake, you know. I mean, most of the time, I think the cops put it in her head more.
Can I just make a comment? 2 things. Did you hear that big atomic bomb going off in the MTSO office when they got that DNA result? And the other point is, Stephen making that comment about forgiving Penny, saying it was not her fault and it was the cops, he just signed his own death warrant then and there. The plan to get him started right then. Just my opinion.
I had a question maybe directed more towards you, Dr. Silkman. What are the odds of it coming down to this one pubic hair? And to the rest of you as well, like what are the chances of this? Is it really that crazy that this happened? Like it almost didn't. That's my point.
Well, the thing is that when Penny Bernstein was at the hospital, they did a pubic hair combing. They also put her on paper, and they basically brushed her down to get any potential forensic evidence. So they do a sex rape kit, essentially like that. So they did a pubic hair combing. And when they reanalyzed it back in 2003, 12 of those pubic hairs, or 12 of the hairs, did not have a follicle bulb. If you don't have a follicle bulb, it means that you can't extract DNA from it. The hair's useless. However, 2 of them did have follicle bulbs, and it just so happened that one of them turned out to be a female. And this is unbelievable, guys, right? Cherie Cohen did the exoneration DNA testing, and I did a presentation on this. There's definitely shenanigans going on with Cherie Cohen, because it's remarkable that she actually said she didn't actually extract genomic DNA from Stephen Avery to do the comparison, as she was actually asked to by Judge Hazelwood. What she did was that she obtained the DNA, the genomic DNA data, and she placed it in CODIS. So her report says it's an unidentified female. Even though the judge said, find out who that woman is, she didn't find out who it was. And furthermore, she had placed the genomic DNA data into the CODIS database, and guess who out popped? Gregory Allen. To their horror, it was Gregory Allen, right? And this is going to have ramifications in 2005. We'll talk about that in another episode. But Cherie Cohen sat on that result, I reckon, for a year, right? It took her a year to do that PCR. I don't believe that at all. To do that PCR reaction is 1 day's work. You can't tell me, this is a critical case, right, in which Cherie Cohen worked on, right, Big Jeff, in 1985. Cherie Cohen did hair evidence that landed Stephen in prison because she did hair comparison. In 2003, Cherie Cohen is now doing pubic hair DNA analysis, and boom, out pops Gregory Allen, to their horror, to their absolute bloody horror. And I reckon that what Cherie Cohen did, she knew the result. She told the boys they had a year to think about what they were going to do next. Eventually, they had to release the result because Judge Hazelwood would have said, hey, what's keeping you guys? So she had no alternative to release the results.
So, Dr. Silkman, just to be clear, are you saying that the Innocence Project did it and came up with this result that it wasn't Stephen, and then to verify what the Innocence Project did, they asked Helmet Head to reproduce it, and she did it, but it took her a whole year, or what was this?
No. The Innocence Project, basically what Judge Hazelwood said was, look, these are the samples you need to collect from the sex rape kit. They also collected samples from Stephen Avery, standards, right? Standards from Stephen, including, now wait for it, a buccal swab, item W. So Cherie Cohen actually had a buccal swab of Stephen Avery back in 2003. Now, according to her report, she never extracted genomic DNA from Stephen Avery. So the judge said, okay, I give all the material to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, and Cherie Cohen obviously nominated herself to do the testing. The Innocence Project didn't do the testing. It was all done by Cherie Cohen. Judge Hazelwood said, if the Wisconsin State Crime Lab doesn't get a result, all the samples have to go to an alternative laboratory, right? So, of course, Cherie Cohen did the pubic hair DNA extraction twice, confirmed the result twice, and let the appropriate people know. So once the result was known, there was no arguments. The person who attacked Penny Bernstein was not Stephen Avery. It was Gregory Allen. Now, think about this. How does Gregory Allen's pubic hair get onto the pubic hair region of Penny Bernstein if it's not through direct contact? Boom, gone.
Drop the mic.
Yep, drop the mic. And the bomb went off.
Had to be something. Had to be something to witness. I couldn't imagine to be a fly on the wall of MTSO at that point.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yep, we'll get to hear it.
Got to get writing some reports that you should have written 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely amazing comments. I just want to say thank you again and put a point on that. And just by coincidence, look who is in the frame at this moment, a young Brendan Dassey.
Now, ain't that scary?
Yeah, it is. When I was just listening to you guys, I was looking at this picture and I was just soaking it all in. And that's when I realized I've never really taken the time to realize he's in it until this moment. And then I looked around, and then in the background, you can see Stephen on the right with all the film crew and all the cameras in his face. And then if you look on the left, there's another, appears to be a kid with like black. I don't know whether he's holding something on the side there. But anyway, I just was looking at it. And then I often have thought, which I don't know if this is the right episode to bring it up, but maybe might touch base with it more with when we get into the Teresa story and Brennan becomes more involved. But Brennan was a witness to all this. He was watching his uncle become, this limelight, and he was wrongful conviction, and then the civil suit came in, and there would have been talk in the family and all that. I have often wondered, and again, this is purely speculation on my behalf and just my observations. Barb was a hard worker. She worked for a living, and she was seeing Scott, but it was all quiet under the radar. But they weren't financially secure as such. Sometimes I wonder, I'm not saying that it was a driving motive for Brendan to lie, but sometimes I wonder whether he took all this in, and being simple-minded, he's watched all this about his uncle, and he sees when you haven't done something, the truth always comes out. And when it comes out, it can get rewarded. I wonder sometimes at the back of his mind when he was wrongful convicted, like confessing, he was thinking to himself, doesn't matter, because like my uncle, it'll all come out that this is not true. And then I will get rewarded.
I'm on the same. No, I'm actually on the same wavelength with you. To the point where it's like, if you really if you didn't do anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. My mother used to say that. And I think when you go to school and the teachers say, if you tell the truth, you don't have anything to worry about. And that's definitely a frame of mind for him at the time. And I agree with mostly what you're saying there, that yes, you're thinking, well, even if I tell them what they want to hear, they're going to verify the story and find out that I wasn't even there. So how could I be convicted of something I didn't do? I know that can't happen, right?
It actually takes me back to the West Memphis 3 when Damien says it. They come and have an interview with him later, and they said, you were laughing in trial, and he admitted, he goes, I did. I was laughing inappropriately. I was making inappropriate comments. He goes, but I thought it was all a big joke. He goes, I knew I hadn't done anything. So when I was sitting there listening in the middle of the trial, he goes, I was just waiting for them to go, right, this is a joke, right? He goes, I honestly believed that by the end, no one would believe it because it wasn't true. So I was just feeding into the laughter with him because I thought it was a big joke. So for a mind like Brendan, I often wonder whether he, not subconsciously, because I'm not sure if he quite understood the complexity of it all, but he saw his uncle get free from something he was accused of doing that he didn't do. And in the back of his mind, he honestly might have thought, oh, well, I'll just tell them what they got to hear. They got into my head. It'll get me out. And it'll all come out that I told lies anyway. So it doesn't really matter. I've just always considered that. And especially when you look at this moment where you see him involved in it. He was in those moments where the film crew were there and the family were all together. Like, he was living it so he could understand the outcomes. That was just, again, it's my interpretation. I just thought it would be interesting to kind of slip that in.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, the scary thing is, guys, is that Brendan's story was so ridiculous, outrageous, contradictory, didn't make any sense at all. You would have thought that the investigator, and we'll talk about this later in later episodes, you would have thought that the investigators would have thought, Brendan, what you're saying is just full of crap. Just go home to your mum. Yet, we know, sadly, they couldn't let him go because he was a key witness to the alleged crime. So they had to hobble a story together. No matter how ridiculous it was, they had to hold on to him. But I agree with Kelly. Yeah, I mean, Brendan's recollections were just so ridiculous, yet people believed him. That's the scary part.
I don't know.
The revelation hit the DA's office and the sheriff's office like a bomb. And as it began to unfold what had happened, there was then a huge set of repercussions on a whole series of people in those offices.
The day of or the day after Stephen's release, law enforcement officers in Manitowoc are writing memos to describe activity that had occurred almost 10 years earlier. They don't do that unless they feel threatened.
Did you see who that was walking down the steps? It's Fassbender and Link.
When I called Dennis Vogel to tell him the news that Stephen Avery wasn't guilty of assaulting Penny Bernson, I was expecting to hear some shock or some surprise, like, oh my goodness, how did this happen? Or I feel terrible about it, or thank goodness the DNA proved it. But I didn't hear any of that from Mr. Vogel. What I heard instead was a question, whether or not there was anything on Gregory Allen in his file. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it showed me two things. It showed me that he suspected that Gregory Allen was the assailant, but it also showed me I didn't know how else to take it other than that he was worried about his exposure, that something about Gregory Allen was in his file. I started leafing through Dennis Vogel's file on Avery, and I come across a criminal complaint, State of Wisconsin versus Gregory Allen, in the Avery file, which didn't make a lot of sense. It was a charge of lewd and lascivious behavior. He had dropped his shorts, he exposed himself, and he lunged at this woman. And it was the same basic section of the beach where Penny Bernson was assaulted two years later. And I looked at which prosecutor had prosecuted Gregory Allen earlier, and it was Dennis Vogel.
Can I just make a comment? Right. So you could tell when we have a look at the depositions later on, all Stephen's civil suit attorneys had to do was to drop that report right in front of Vogel and say to him, "You had the information. You knew all of this. How come it never occurred to you that you had convicted the wrong guy?" And watch District Attorney Vogel squirm in his seat. He'll probably do a Mark Rohrer. I don't recall. Likely.
I know we're getting a little long, but it's actually interesting to contrast what Griesbach said right there with what he said in his book, which is a little bit more damning.
Can I just make the comment that
please,
if you want to know what happened in 1985, Griesbach's book is brilliant. His book is actually in two parts. He looks at what happened in 1985 and what happened in 2005. Everything he wrote about 2005 was pure garbage. He made so many mistakes, but he covered what happened in 1985 in rich detail. Brilliant. Yep, definitely worth a read.
So I'll quote you from that book right now, and this picks up where he said he called Vogel. He says, "I hung up this is a quotation from his book Indefensible. I hung up the phone and just sat there in my office for a while, reflecting upon our conversation. Vogel's question, is there anything on Allen in the file, implied that he knew that Allen, not Avery, was the assailant, didn't it? He was covering his tracks, and he must have thought I'd go along. How else could I take it? Despite their reputations, most attorneys possess as much integrity as the next person, and maybe even more. Dennis Vogel appeared to be one of the exceptions. How could he prosecute someone he knew was innocent? And how could he let somebody as dangerous as Gregory Allen go free?" He goes on. It would have also been nearly impossible to convict the real assailant, Gregory Allen. After Sheriff Kasurik and Detective Couché's ridiculously suggestive eyewitness identification process achieved its objective of having Penny Bernstein identify Stephen Avery as her attacker, it would have been nearly impossible for Vogel to bring Allen to justice. He goes on. Regarding Vogel, was it possible he didn't know? The more I tried to convince myself that Vogel didn't know, the more convinced I became that he did. Then I recalled my conversation with some of the staff, office staff, a few days after the crime lab called with the DNA results, about how all three staff members who worked there at the time thought that Gregory Allen, not Stephen Avery, was the assailant. They even approached Vogel with their concerns. However, he told them they were mistaken. He had checked with Allen's probation agent, which he wasn't even in jail, and said that Allen had an airtight alibi. A statement that, like so many other statements made by the authorities in the first Avery case, turned out to be a big, fat lie. Again, if you go to Deb Strauss's investigation, her question, the question that she's asked, did you ever interview extensively Mr. Rohr or Mr. Griesbach about what they had been told and by whom they had been given this concern? Because remember, it's Rohr and Griesbach that actually launched the request for what ended up being the Peg whitewash, right? Because the bomb goes off. What do? You're the district attorney. Rohr didn't really have anything to do with it. He said, okay, well, we better do an investigation to find out what happened, to see what goes on. He launches the investigation. Deb Strauss gets asked the question, did you ever go talk to Griesbach in your investigation, right? Griesbach, who just wrote all that stuff. You just heard him. He wrote all this stuff, which is even more damning. Did you ever talk to Griesbach? What's Deb Strauss say? No.
Nope.
Why should I?
Unbelievable.
So it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious, guys, that they didn't want to scratch too deep because they knew it was really looking bad. So in essence, what they were doing is damage control. That's exactly what they were doing. Damage control.
That was evidence that at least made it possible that the DA and the sheriff either knew or should have known that Stephen Avery was not the assailant. And not only that, we believe there was the potential that they knew, in fact, who the assailant was, but continued with the prosecution. we needed for somebody else to look at it. And the logical office would be the Attorney General's office.
It's extraordinarily significant that a prosecutor asks the Attorney General, the Chief Prosecutor of the state, to investigate his own department and law enforcement in that community. That doesn't happen.
Is that another one of the never happened before, hasn't happened since?
Well, the thing is, when everything is done internally, you know there's going to be bias straight away. What was required was an external body that can look at things objectively. But when when the fox is in charge of the hen house, you know you're going to get trouble. It's as simple as that.
Would you tell us what your occupation is, please?
I am a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation.
What are your duties as a special agent?
To investigate crimes relating to misconduct in office.
And you were one of 2 DCI agents to work on an investigation involving the prosecution in 1985 of Stephen Avery. Is that right?
Yes. We wanted to interview everybody we could identify as being involved in the investigation or in the prosecution.
Understand that this is all happening in public view. The public knew that an Attorney General's investigation was underway. And there was a sense that law enforcement may be vulnerable here and probably feeling it. Because God knows there were numerous editorials, articles, all of which had the theme of how could this happen?
So just to set the hierarchy of the investigation, right? The 2 people that you just saw, the 2 women, Deb Strauss and Amy Lehman, were the people that Peg Lautenschlager sent out to be their first level of investigation. You've heard a couple of times in this episode how deeply they dug. Did you have any intellectual curiosity? No. Their findings were sent back, and the first draft of the reports were written by a woman named Jennifer Nashhold, who is now a Court of Appeals judge. And it's one of the reasons why Stephen's appeal went the direction that it did in one of these cases, because Jennifer Nashhold would have to recuse herself. Who wants to make a guess as to who was the next level editor making it out of the DOJ, essentially before Peg? Anybody?
Well, I know that Tom Fallon was there.
Tom Fallon. Fallon was the next editor of that report.
Yep.
Is that unbelievable or what?
That is just freakish. That is freakish. That soon he would become the special prosecutor in the Stephen Avery case. Correct. Against Teresa Halbach. So, in other words, Tom Fallon was deeply involved in trying to make the state look really good.
That's right. Had to seal the deal. He had to seal the deal twice.
Correct. Correct.
The stories of mine that broke some new ground were the ones that documented how quickly Stephen Avery was a suspect, and then how Gregory Allen was not considered. I went through a lot of police records about Gregory Allen and kind of built a chronology of his contacts with law enforcement. Police in Manitowoc had followed him for 13 straight days, where they were making multiple checks on him, as many as 14 times a day, because he had been implicated in several sex-related crimes. After Stephen Avery was already arrested, had already been identified twice, the police department contacted Penny Berenson. She was shocked and confused and contacted the sheriff's department herself to ask, well, what about this Gregory Allen?
There it is. She'll only confuse you.
This isn't just about an innocent guy being locked up. It's about a dangerous rapist being out on the streets doing what he wanted to do.
I mean, that's a lot about Gregory Allen here, but as a stop on this frame, it says over the next 10 years, he committed at least 2 more sex-related crimes. This guy was a predator. He was right on their doorstep. They knew it. They ignored it, and they prosecuted Stephen Avery, and we're just seeing more and more of this unfold in front of us.
Yeah, look at the headline below, right? Below the 3 dots. Too often, when police quickly seize on one suspect, right? We know what the rest of that is without it having to see the text ourselves.
There you go.
And Kelly confirmed that with Investigator T, but that's not what happened in this case. This was not a case of oops, mistaken identity. This is much more sinister and filled with malfeasance. It's not a case of nonfeasance. This is malfeasance.
Correct. Yep. This is not only tunnel vision, investigative bias, but targeting, specific targeting, knowing full well that there was another potential suspect who had the perfect MO, and he was ignored.
And I think ultimately what bothers me about this still to this day is they never had to pay a price for any of this mistake.
That's 100% correct, Jeff. There's no closure, and the perpetrators of the crime against Stephen Avery and his family, they got off scot-free. And to make matters worse, Stephen had to settle for a much, much lower sum. And believe it or not, the Horbachs actually sued Stephen to get that money. So Stephen would have ended up with 0 money to defend himself. And I believe Angie Sukowicz was the judge dealing with that particular suit that the Horbachs put in. So it could have ended up that Stephen would have had no independent legal representation and would have gone with a public defender. And we all know how that would have ended for him, right? It would have been a complete disaster. So you're correct. The perpetrators of this injustice to Stephen and his family got off scot-free.
And the press lost all intellectual curiosity as to what happened after this.
Yep, you're
all
correct.
But a very few people, right?
Yep, that Tom guy, that Tom Kirchner, he was a really good investigative journalist, and he put 2 and 2 together. And I could tell you right now, the Kacerik and Vogel and other police officers and sheriffs would have been really, really pissed off with what he was putting out in the papers because it put the spotlight on them, and that was a big no-no.
Yeah, and you saw those depositions. If you read the depositions, how uncomfortable things were getting. Teresa Hallback miraculously goes missing days before Kacerik's definition. Days.
That's correct. And Stephen,
isn't that convenient?
As Bibi would say, how convenient. But the remarkable thing is that Stephen got arrested on November the 9th, 1 day before Kacerik was meant to have his deposition. So once he got arrested, everything got halted. Incredible. And mind you, he got arrested on a possession of a gun, which wasn't even Stephen's. So they knew what they were doing. Kratz was the one that got him on the gun charge, possession as a felon, right? And my understanding was that they stuffed up because he had a hunting license.
But doesn't it just show you they know how to get people off the streets if they want you off the street? They will find a way to arrest you. Yeah. Why are they not doing this with Gregory Allen? If they don't need to chase him, they can be, oh,
No.
you fell and you tripped and you littered, and now we're gonna arrest you. What's the one police often, you're not obstruct, you're resisting. Oh, you're resisting, and then we can take you in. If they want to get Gregory Allen off the street, they could have.
They had
That's
no
my
intentions.
point.
They had no intentions
Why,
to.
but it's like, why?
Yep, they had no intentions to, despite all the misdemeanors and the huge record. Now, let's reverse it. If that had been Stephen Avery who had been doing those crimes,
right?
If that was Stephen, he would have been in prison. He never would have come out again. Yet, overtly, Gregory Allen was doing all this stuff, and he was untouchable.
Unbelievable.
It was a hot end of June day in 1995, and I was laying on the couch after I put my daughter to bed and had fallen asleep. It was roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Gregory Allen broke into my home. He had taken the towel, apparently, I guess, off the clothesline, threw it over my head, and then dragged me from the living room to the bedroom. He pretty much forced himself as far as oral sex. It felt like an eternity at the moment. I was afraid my daughter the next morning would find me in a pool of blood. But thank God we're okay. The judge that I had during sentencing said, if I could put you away for life, I would. But unfortunately, I can only give you the maximum, which was 60 years. And he was around 47 at the time that this happened. So I don't think he'll be able to harm anyone ever again.
That woman's pain lies squarely on the shoulders of Dennis Vogel Docuseries.
Correct.
No report was prepared by Kusorek about the information that was brought to him by Bertner. Is that right?
That's correct.
Kusorek tells you that he did not think that the sheriff's department knew who Gregory Allen was in 1985.
Correct.
That was inconsistent with Allen having been booked into the jail and photographed in 1984.
Correct.
So if the sheriff had wanted to see a photo of Allen in 1985, all he had to do was go to his own jail and find it.
Correct.
Can I just make a comment here, Jeff? That's the photo that they can't find. Right? So imagine if Penny had seen the 1984 photo of Gregory Allen, boom, all over.
That wasn't going to happen.
That's crazy. I mean, we've never seen that either. We'll never see that photo. And as I'm listening to this, I'm going, oh, they're going to give, Gregory Allen a stiff penalty. But, I think he's up for parole this year. It's potential. I mean, there's a potential he could get out. He was never prosecuted for Bernson's rape.
Correct.
So even though it was proven in a court of appeals that he raped her, those charges have never been levied against Allen.
That's right.
You and Deb tell the lawyers that it appears that there was no real investigation done by the sheriff's department, and they had a suspect and they were going to make it work, and that what's a little troubling to you is the lack of paperwork that's done and so forth.
Deb would have wrote that.
Okay, but she's speaking for the two of you.
Yes, I believe she was speaking for the two of us.
And was that your opinion at the time?
Can I just make a comment there, Jeff? Now, you've got this is an investigation, right? And you've got one of the investigators laughing in a civil suit.
It's unbelievable.
It's truly mind blowing.
because she's in the other seat a lot. Like, think about that. Her job is sitting across from people, but in the other chair and asking people questions. And she knows that when people laugh stuff off, it's inappropriate. Yes, it's unbelievable.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that was our opinion at the time.
In fact, it turned out from all of your investigation that this one was handled differently.
It appeared from this investigation that the sheriff was really involved in this one, which wasn't the norm.
The sheriff told the DA not to screw this case up because the sheriff wanted Avery convicted of his crime.
The tables were turning entirely, and the changes were all in Stephen's favor. We thought what had happened to Stephen Avery would have justified the Attorney General's office into, frankly, into bringing criminal charges, but certainly warranted a pretty strong condemnation.
Can I just make the comment? You know, we hindsight's always 20/20, right? Imagine if Peg had to do this again, right? Instead of whitewashing the whole report, she should have slapped the wrists of certain individuals, said, yep, we definitely made mistakes. Let's give Stephen $1 million, which I'm sure he would have accepted at the time, right? And you start to wonder whether the Teresa Halbach incident would have taken place. Just my opinion. But this report, I've read it many times like everybody else has, is the most shameful, blatant piece of crap you'll ever read of an investigation. It's a shocker.
I just want to say something that you just bounce off what you just said. You said if they're just giving him like a few mil, maybe the Teresa thing wouldn't have eventuated. I think this is where I've always said it comes down to whose story is this. And if it's Teresa's story, it wouldn't have mattered whether she went to the Avery salvage yard that day. Her fate would have been still sealed because whoever killed her does not live on the Avery salvage yard. So I do often wonder whose story is this, because if it is Stephen's story and this is all a setup, then you have to wonder who and why did Teresa die and what sacrifice was made. Why her? Out of everyone around the Avery salvage yard, why did she have to be killed, murdered, whatever happened that day, that time, at that very moment? It's just, it absolutely mind boggles me that that is the foundation of this entire case. Whose story is it? And would have Teresa still have met her fate that day if she didn't make the appointment at that last minute to go to the Avery salvage yard?
That's a very good point. But the question is, Stephen got dragged into this. So in actual fact, it becomes Stephen's and Teresa's story, in effect.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to define where the line is because, again, if it always comes back to me, if Stephen didn't make that phone call that morning at 8:12 in the morning and try to attempt for her to come, then would he have been dragged into it? Maybe, maybe not. But the thing is, maybe they would have just found something else. And when you go back and we look through, they were trying to find other things. We had the Marie situation that was before Teresa that they were looking at. There was that incident with the little girl in the truck and she was found and someone said again, oh, that sounds like Stephen Avery. So there was all these little dynamics of events that were happening prior to Teresa that they were looking at. But the Teresa story itself, it's one thing to go from, around those stories, it was like a potential sexual assault on this little girl, another sexual assault on this Marie, and then we have Teresa, where there's a narrative of potential a sexual assault, but it's a murder. Like it's like the irony of it is they talked in the court that his crimes got worse as he got moved
Correct.
on, but to
That's
me,
correct.
it almost seems like the evidence against him got worse as they were trying to make it worse for him. Sexual bang murder. Like it's the ultimate crime.
And he never was charged for anything sexual.
And he wasn't exactly. Again, it's just like, where did this sexual come from? It's like it goes back to the cat incident, like that characteristics of burning, like this, trying to get him to look like he's a burning when there's a situation, he burns things. And then all these sexual allegations to try to build this character of him that he's able to burn things and sexually assault them and now murder them. It's just like, wow, too much.
That's right. So when the judge said your crimes have been escalating, well, let's think about it. He ran his cousin off the road and then he escalated to sexual assault, murder, dismemberment, and cremation. Wow, that's a huge jump.
Unbelievable.
It's the power of the court of public opinion, right? There's a reason why they're seeding the court of public opinion with this information to leave this impression, and it works. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work.
I agree. Well, we just have a few minutes left of the actual documentary left, and we'll see if we can get through it and then have some wrap-up comments after that.
State Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager says her department conducted an exhaustive review of police and trial records and had interviews with the victim, police, prosecutors, and defenders. Her conclusion?
We don't see that there are any criminal actions against somebody or criminal missteps. Don't seem to be any ethical violations.
They said there was no wrongdoing with them. Then no one to live 18 years if they didn't do nothing wrong. Well, they did everything wrong.
The state's 15-page review concludes that at worst, the sheriff's department failed to investigate Allen. All little consolation to Avery.
I was hoping they were going to do something to Manitowoc County. Set them straight so they don't do it again.
When I saw the Justice Department report, it's like they kind of said, well, yeah, they did these things that were wrong. Oh, but they kind of had good intentions or some crap like that. So we don't really think anything's just further justified. It's like, what a crock of shit. People did a lot of wrong things, and a man's life suffered. How can that not be worth anything?
I don't think Stephen had any alternative but to bring the lawsuit. There was never going to be law enforcement recognition and acceptance of responsibility. There was never going to be law enforcement held accountable. I mean, I just didn't think that was going to happen, and it sure as hell wasn't going to happen after the AG's report. I mean, I'm amazed that sitting in Milwaukee, we couldn't hear the sigh of relief coming out of Manitowoc as soon as that AG's report came out.
Sometimes it just makes me sick. Like just hearing about it and what they all did. Everything what they did wrong should come back at them.
They weren't just going to let Stevie out. They weren't going to hand that man $36 million. They weren't going to be made a laughingstock, that's for sure. They just weren't going to do all that. And something in my gut said they're not done with him. Something's going to happen. They're not handing that kind of money over to Steve Avery.
We told him he could expect people would say that this was just a get-rich effort, that family, private matters would now be public. And don't be too surprised if people say some things about you that you've never even heard before. They're just plain false. The one thing we didn't tell him is that you have to be careful when you bring a lawsuit against a sheriff's department in a community where you still live, because you could end up getting charged with murder.
Do we have a body or anything yet?
I don't believe so.
We have Stephen Avery in custody, though.
Anybody have any wrap-up thoughts about this episode in general, or just of what we saw today?
I'll go first. We're going to see more of the depositions. I personally think there's some there's some very interesting stuff in the depositions of Deb Strauss and Amy Lehman that they didn't go into, that I might have chosen over and above some of the testimony that you saw there. Just them not being able to answer some questions, the likes of which we posed, right? That's what I think this is one of the great values of this forum, is that we can go back and there's things that we know because we've done independent research that just they didn't have time to get into the documentary. In summary, 1985, complete and total frame job. They knew it. They're drawing pictures of Couchet. Couchet's drawing pictures of him. He needed to go away. I mean, there's rabbit holers that say that Manitowoc sicked Gregory Allen on Penny Bernstein to specifically to frame Stephen. How else could it be that the police didn't? The police just happened to not watch him. Why is he so untouchable? Why did Vogel downgrade the charges? When it's so bad, when the frame job is so bad, they have to say, "Oh my God, that theory actually has some level of credence." I don't believe that theory, by the way, but when that kind of theory answers so many questions, there's something wrong.
Callie, do you have any comments to wrap up today or this episode 1?
Just basically, I enjoyed going back through this. I think it's really important to start at the beginning. Great format. I like how it's ended because now we're moving into the case of Teresa. Again, like Big Jeff said, we're going to see the depositions and we're going to see a little bit more, but we're setting the foundation of where we're going in 2005. And I'm just excited to continue to work with all you guys. And along the way, now that we're moving into the Teresa case, hopefully we can get some people in to join us with particular areas that they've really looked into, get some more feedback as well. And it's been great. Sookman?
There was an extremely powerful episode. When I saw it for the very first time, I was completely outraged. And what I do appreciate the fact that we as a panel have gone over this again, and it's amazing. I've seen this episode at least maybe 12 or 15 times. No kidding. You still pick up new stuff. You still pick up, because hindsight is 20/20. You now understand where all the connections come from, how everything connects up together. And the thing that I got the most was that when there is corruption, it can only be hidden right from the very, very top. Right? You're not going to get any higher than Peg herself. She put a lid on it. So when people sort of say, look, corruption doesn't exist, well, you've seen it. You've seen a whitewash in action and how it was taken care of. And Stephen was completely justified in his civil lawsuit, 100%.
Well, I really appreciate those comments, and I just want to express to all of the panel that it's been great having you guys every week, and I'm really excited. I'll be excited to record the next one as soon as we end today's show. So it's been fantastic. I think there's so much that I have on my mind, and I'm sure the viewers at home. So if you have anything that comes up afterwards, please throw it in the comments. write it out, and we'll even take some questions from the comments if it comes to that, or if you have any interesting perspective. We always appreciate that. So I just want to say thanks again to Kelly and Big Jeff and Dr. Silkman. Big Jeff, did I ask you for your wrap-up comments?
You did. I just wanted to add further to what you said.
Please
if,
go ahead.
If somebody is just coming across this, right? If you happen to watch Man for the first time, you're coming across this and you say this can't really be true, and you do a Google search and you come upon a video like this. What you should do is you should join one of the Discord channels. There's people who want to talk about this. There's people you can learn from who can point you to the place to do independent research. And I think it's probably worthwhile to put some of those locations in the in the description, so that people know where to go to be able to dig further, because this is just such a you do need to interact with the community to get the backstory, and the backstory is so important to understand.
Absolutely. And I think that comes back to how this idea, this germ of an idea was started, for us to all kind of get back to basics and get on the same page. Sometimes it's just hard to keep everything straight. Thank you again, Big Jeff. Thank you, Dr. Silkman and Kelly. And this has been episode 3 of Discussing a Murderer.